So today, Take Fountain continues its exploration of the life and genius of Richard Pryor. We are very, very lucky, Bill, today.
To have our first guest.
Yeah, there you go.
We've never had a guest. We're not sure how we'll handle this.
Well, that's right.
I mean, I'll be fine.
Well, I know Jennifer, and she is smart and tough, and I think both of us are in trouble.
She's the one. If you've ever seen there are a couple of really good Richard Pryor documentaries out there, and she was heavily involved in, I think, in at least one of them.
I think she produced them.
Yeah, and she's a major voice in them. She is the primary voice. You're in them too, but she's really in them.
Yes.
And so she is the expert because she was married to him twice.
She was married to him twice, and Jennifer, I got to say, she is a person I have a huge amount of respect for. Richard was not easy duty, and she not only loved him, she helped him through some of the most critical phases of his life. We're about to learn a lot more about that, because in just a moment, we're going to bring you Jennifer Lee Pryor, widow of Richard Pryor. We are honored today to have Jennifer Lee Pryor, one of my favorite humans, and the 2 times wife of the remarkable and still triumphant Richard Pryor, the funniest man in the world. But separate and apart from that, Mr. Pryor also had a really uncanny understanding of the culture and who people are and where things were going. He was, by turns, a great friend of mine and a difficult partner in the making of many films.
Yeah.
Jennifer,
Yes, sir.
you look great. So
Thank-
how did you and Richard meet?
Okay, I actually love this story, and I'm happy you asked. I was an actress getting little parts here and there in Hollywood, and I was knocking around Texas with a friend of mine that summer of 1977, and got back into singing and doing, she and I were singing on the road at certain clubs in and around Austin, particularly. Right. And got back into Los Angeles, pulled into Lucy Soroyan's driveway, dusty and broke, and said, "Oh, I need a gig. Back from Texas." And she said, "I'm decorating Richard's house. I'm working with him on some other projects." She was actually working with him on the NBC variety show too as a consultant. And she said, "I need someone to help me at the house. If you'd be willing, I'm game. I needed something." So I started being her Sue decorator, as it were. Right. And that's how I met him. And I met him August 22nd, 1977. Boom. Big date in my life. Yeah.
Yes.
And there was an artist friend of his there named Prophet. And if you remember the old SX70s Polaroids, he took a picture of Richard and me that day. And you can see that I look as if I, swallowed the canary. And I really adored him the second I met him. Yeah. And it was his vulnerability that jumped off the page, so to speak. Yeah. It was just, he was so tender and fragile to me, and open and just sweet and endearing immediately. So I worked under Lucy's tutelage, so to speak, and was at the house every day. And every day there was another woman coming out of his bedroom. I would sit at the dining room table with my notebooks and work that had to be accomplished for that day. And there would be another woman coming out, a one-night stand, coming out with him. Oh, hello, goodbye. And he and I just started talking. You remember the house, Tom. It was in Northridge, and we would go to the atrium. He would ask me to come upstairs, and we would sit and we would talk about movies. He talked about Frank Capra and how much he loved him, and A Family Dream came out of that, actually, and that conversation, and those conversations. And he was, I was smitten, and we just talked for months, and while I worked there. And Lucy came and went. There was a drama one night with her, which involved cocaine and a gun.
Okay.
If you'd like me to go into it, I can. We can save it for another time if you'd like.
We will talk about cocaine and guns in just a minute. So
Okay. That's basically how I met him. Yeah.
yeah, that's a wonderful story. And what I love about that, of course, is that Richard truly loved you. I mean, as you remember, Richard and I had dinner together at Musso's maybe twice a month at least for years and years and years. And we would talk like guys talk.
Right.
And Richard would talk about girls, and then separately, in a whole nother category, he'd talk about you.
Oh.
Because you're the person that he was in love with, and you're the person who loved him, and he knew that. And he knew the rest of it was very, very, shall we say, sketchy.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about drugs. Richard, when I first met him, which was some years before that,
Right.
he was doing a 20-minute opening gig for cash at a jazz club in the Valley, somewhere around Van Nuys Boulevard. I don't remember exactly where. And the guy who was the headliner was a saxophone player. And Richard did, the gig lasted, I think, 5 days or something. And they were just giving him cash, and he was high, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
He did, however, open that show memorably to me. Jen, I know you'll appreciate this. He looked at this very small audience in this smoky, crowded club, and he looked at him for another beat, and he just said, "Motherfucker, motherfucker, motherfucker." And then he had everyone's attention.
Yeah.
Tell me
do it.
about how you dealt with Richard's inconsistent, periodic, sometimes very destructive, sometimes very straight relationship to drugs.
The reality is that before Freebase came into his life, he actually regulated the snorting of cocaine, right?
Right.
He was, and what is kind of surprises most people is when I tell them he was rather disciplined. For instance, when he did, when he was working on woodshedding for what became Live in Concert, he would take a nap in the afternoon. He would really knew how to moderate and regulate himself. And yes, he did drugs. He snorted cocaine, but he would regulate himself. So his priority was the work.
Right.
And so he kept that in check.
Yeah.
And how did I handle that? Well, frankly, I snorted with him.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't keep up, I felt that I had a mission, a position, if you will, in our relationship, which was to keep the ship rather steady. So I did what you can call recreational.
Right.
But I always knew how to cut it off and stop. Richard didn't necessarily have that line in the sand, as it were. However, again, I want to reiterate that he always kept it in check until that dreaded pipe came into his life.
Right.
And then it was, as you know, out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bill, I had the experience of going with Richard. He would call me sometimes 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and he'd say, "I'm going to go on at midnight at the Comedy Store." You know, and I'd ask him whenever he was working on new material to let me know, because I love to understand where he was going and what about it. And sometimes those things became movies, and sometimes pieces of a television show, and sometimes documentaries about him and all kinds of stuff. The thing about it, Jennifer, I'd love you to talk about this. What always amazed me is that I'd look around the room, and then in the back, with her head stuck around a corner, would be Eddie Murphy and Whoopi, and this one and that one. Every comedian of color, and Robin Williams, and Lily Tomlin, and the whole gang. If Richard was going to do 5 minutes of new material at the Comedy Club at midnight on a Wednesday, they would all be there.
This is true. They would watch the master at work. I mean, they knew that Richard worked without a net.
Right.
And by that, I mean that he would simply get up there and, most comics, try out new material, certainly in front of audiences, usually small, and they kind of handpicked them. But Richard really took chances and risks that I think was really an example to other comics.
Right.
And he on stage, and I know you know this, Thom, and remember it quite well, sometimes would say, this isn't working. I don't know. I'm not funny. I don't feel it tonight. Whatever's going to. In fact, he did that the first night of Live on Sunset. That shot was supposed to be a 2-night shoot. And he walked off stage because he really felt it wasn't working, you know. But he was so vulnerable on stage and honest about where he was and authentic.
You know, I always wanted to know, did he run things by you? My comedian friends, they'll say, I'm about to do a gig tonight. They'll come, is this funny? Did he do that with you?
Oh, yes. And not only that, but he took a few bits that came from me.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So you gave him material. You gave him some material.
Absolutely.
Great.
In fact, sometimes I would say to him, Richard, what are we fighting about? Or you just need no material right now?
Right.
Is this you looking for new grist for the mill, so to speak? But one time in particular, we had made love, and he got out of bed and he was strutting like a peacock and saying, that was fantastic. I said, yeah, Richard, you just killed the pussy, didn't you? You just killed. And he goes, yeah, I'm the pussy murderer. That's what I am. I'm the pussy macho man. And he started that, and that became a routine.
Right.
Right.
He would impersonate white people, and
Yes.
it's one of the funniest things I feel is that when he impersonated white, did you ever feel he was impersonating you?
Oh, many times.
Yeah.
But by the way, speaking of those impersonations, I think every comic, black and white, have done the white man voice.
Oh yeah, that's been stolen.
Yeah. I mean, that's been stolen so many times. By the way, Robin
Chappelle
Williams,
does that. Every time I see Dave Chappelle do that, I think that's Richard's.
yeah, the origin of that, because that came totally out of Richard's brilliance.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh no, he did the female voice in Live in Concert.
Right.
And, which to me was pejorative. I didn't appreciate that female voice. But it was kind of without strength and a little too weak for me. But nevertheless, he
got a laugh.
Yeah, he did. It worked.
Yeah.
It worked. Yeah. Yeah.
So we'd be in a meeting. We'd be walking down a street. We'd go into the commissary at the studio, whatever. And I realized he had watched somebody do something and absorbed it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I admired hugely about Richard is that he was such a cultural sponge.
He saw so much. He was such an observer.
Let's talk a little bit, Jennifer, about people in Richard's lives other than you. It seemed to me that I'd never run into a star with a more unusual group of hanger-ons, followers, exploiters, manipulators, and 1,000 other things. What was your take on that? And would you also talk about, while we're talking about that, I was on many occasions at the house when Grandma or some other relative was there. So can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, that was difficult, Thom, that aspect and that part of Richard's life and his community, if you will, of people around him. And I don't think it's strange. I think every celebrity has got that entourage, difficult entourage business around them. Richard did collect a little more than usual, perhaps.
Yeah.
He was not without a manipulative side, Richard.
Right.
And as celebrities are, they're not celebrities, out of the blue. They have a way of, elevating themselves. And I think that this entourage, and David Banks, I loved. However, I have to say he was my favorite friend of Richard's.
Yeah, mine too.
He was. Was he?
Yeah.
He was genuine. There was something very genuine about David Banks. Paul Mooney, my least favorite.
Count me number 2 on that list.
I'm very outspoken and honest about that. Paul was not only not a good influence on Richard, but I've seen him empty the room at the Comedy Store. I know you have as well, Tom.
Yes.
Mitzi barred him from the Comedy Store over 25 times. I think that Richard had, the better angels and the not so better angels, and
Right.
I think Paul was on the shoulder of the not so better angels.
Yeah, you can't get me
Yeah.
to say a lot of good things about Paul because I saw
No.
too much ugly, manipulative stuff. And
By the way, and let me set the record straight here. He worked on NBC Variety Show. He was one of the writers on JoJo Dancer, and he was one of several writer helpers on Live on Sunset. But my God, the credit that every year I had comics say to me, "Would you please set the record straight, Jennifer?" Paul Mooney didn't write Richard Pryor's material. It was not possible. Richard Pryor
never
wrote
got
it.
close to that experience because
Yeah.
I saw too much of Richard, and I was there when Richard did write his material, and I saw you guys interact.
Yeah, I mean, I took notes on after we shot the car,
Yeah.
on New Year's Eve, 1978, and we went off to Hana, and that's when he and I got together and divorced. He divorced Deborah, obviously, and she was in the car, and he did a 180 going home to Northridge one night after we'd been at the Daisy and had a nice evening. Where are we going? Oh, you'll see. Pulled into the Comedy Store parking lot, took me by the hand, sat me down at a table, and got on stage and started talking about candle wax on the floor.
Right.
And I started taking and I started taking notes, and that ultimately became Live in Concert.
Right.
He would go every night. We'd go every night. I'd sit in the back. I'd take notes. And the next morning, we'd sit by the pool, which you knew well, Tom, at the house in Northridge,
Right.
go over his notes. He threw out what didn't work, keep what did work, and go to the store that night. Go to the store. Worked very hard.
Yeah.
And again, that's the part of people don't understand that Richard actually was very disciplined about his work, and he held it in such high regard.
In general, he did. There are a couple of interesting snafus along the line there, but in general,
not
he did.
Consistent. Exactly right. Exactly
So,
right.
can you leap over the fence with me about Richard's relationship with his grandmother
Oh yes.
and see if we can talk a little bit about that, because I know that's fraught territory in many ways, but
Wow.
it also has a big influence on his life.
Yeah. It was a complicated relationship indeed, because he was taken away from his mother, and I don't believe that ever healed. That wound ever healed.
Right.
And she was the surrogate. She was the punisher. She was the nurturer. She was everything, and of course the provider. She ran the brothel in which Richard was raised, and where his mother, serviced men. I mean, it's ugly to talk about, but it's the reality. It's the truth. It's how he grew up.
Yeah.
And she ran everything with an iron hand. She kept a straight razor in her bra. She nobody got out of hand. She was the punisher, as I said, not only of him, but of everyone in the whorehouse.
Yeah.
So he witnessed that. And indeed, when she would come to the house and stay and be ensconced in the Northridge house for not a few days, not a week or so, but months at a time.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and as much as he loved her, I know he was torn, because there you have an artist such as Richard, who's growing, gaining fame, gaining celebrity, and growing as an artist, who's trying to break away from anything that's holding him back. He's trying to elevate, and there is a reminder ensconced in the house of his past, so that whenever there was a schism, or he's trying to leave it, as it were, she would, don't forget where you come from, son. Don't forget where you come from.
Right.
And well, how are you doing that? And there was one night that so sort of profoundly showed that, expressed that Marvin Gaye was at the house with his wife and another girlfriend, and we were all sitting at the dining room table, and Mama was in the kitchen cooking catfish, and we're at the dining room table with cocaine and stolichnaya and caviar, and that
Right.
that was on the menu.
Yeah, the hors d'oeuvres, right.
And she's in cooking in the kitchen, and Richard said to me, Jennifer, who at the table is a whore? Now, I never backed down from a challenge,
Right.
and I certainly didn't back down from this. So I said, well, maybe she is, and maybe she. It was not a good thing to have done on my part. Because Mama came in and he said, Mama, what do you think? Who at this table? And she said, I think you're all a bunch of damn fools. And Richard at that point told me to take it back, and I did not. I said, well, you asked me, I answered. What am I supposed to do now? And he tossed a champagne bottle at my head, which landed with a good plunk at my head. And I left the table, needless to say. But it, to me, demonstrated, that entire episode to me demonstrated the pull and the push-pull that Richard had with grandmother,
Right.
and his allegiance to her and to where he came from, and, you know, his being torn.
My own experience with her, Jen, was that she would hold court in the kitchen,
Yeah.
and there were a few wives, as you know. There have been a few wives in Richard's lives. Let me get that straight, by the way. What number were you from the first time?
Okay, so there were 6 wives. There are 5 children by 6 women, not all of whom were wives. I didn't have any kids. Let's get that straight. I have dogs. And Richard thanked me for not having any kids. Yeah, I said, Richard, you had too many. Let's be honest. You know, these are too many children here. You don't need one more. So he had the mother of Richard Jr.
Right.
And he was married to her. And then he had a child with Maxine,
Right.
never married Maxine,
Right.
child with her Elizabeth. Then he married Deborah.
Right.
I'm sorry, it was Shelley after that.
Shelley, right.
Shelley, and married Shelley, had Rain by Shelley, and divorced Shelley, and was with Deborah, married Deborah, no children. She was in the car.
Right.
She was that car he shot on 78 New Year's Eve. And after that, he married me.
Right.
And then after me, he married Flynn.
Right.
Had 2 kids, had 1 child by Flynn. He remarried Flynn when he had the heart attack in Australia. She went down there and, you know, I'm going to fix you up and save you. And he remarried her.
Okay.
Had another kid by Richard at that point, 2 kids by Flynn. And then remarried me.
Right.
Yeah.
And
you were with him at the end. You were
I was with him at the end. Yeah, I came back in '94. I was living in New York after he and I, after the first marriage was over. I went back to New York and, you know, to regroup. I wrote a book. I wanted to carry on with my life, and we always stayed in touch. Richard did recycle women. I was no exception. And so we, you know, I was still madly in love with him. I mean, I never stopped loving Richard.
I mean, how did it end? Did they all end the same way, or was yours specific?
No, you know, that's an interesting question too. I think Richard ended got married sometimes to end relationships because he really didn't know how to navigate a relationship. He really couldn't handle stability, right? Every time you get things stable and organized, Richard would go, whoop, upset the apple cart.
Right.
We were married in August 81, and the first marriage, and we took our honeymoon the following January 82, and we kind of shipwrecked on that honeymoon. I left the boat, and we had been in some conflict. He went on my honeymoon without me. on our honeymoon without me.
Is this the one? There's one of the documentaries, which are all fantastic, by
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
One of the documentaries, somebody comes in and says, Richard tells somebody, I just got married yesterday, I want a divorce. Is that you, or is that somebody else?
That was me. Skip Brittingham was down for our wedding.
Yeah.
And on our wedding night, we had an argument. And the next morning, he went to the hotel room at the Hana Hotel and said, Skip, I want a divorce. And you know, obviously we talked him off the ledge, or Skip talked him off the ledge, whatever. And but you know, Richard really had a hard time navigating relationships. He just did. It was terrifying to him. Intimacy was terrifying.
Well, that's where I was actually where I was going, because I produced the Barbara Walters specials for many years, but I started in '88. I did it for 27 years. And then people say, "What's your favorite Barbara Walters special?" I say, "I didn't produce it. It's the one with Richard Pryor, the first one with Richard Pryor, where he talks about intimacy, being scared sexually." You know this interview, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
This had to have some impact on your marriage. Whatever this issue with, I mean, he talks about intimacy as something terrifying.
Well, you know, the truth is, I might have had my own issues too.
Yeah.
Because why else would I pick such a complicated man too, right?
Right.
So I therefore will suggest to you and to myself that I understood it somehow.
Right.
I came from a turbulent family too. A very interesting family. Father was a successful lawyer. Mother was mentally ill. Interesting, fabulous woman, but mentally ill. So I grew up in a certain volatility, and I knew how to navigate that.
Yeah.
I knew how to survive that.
Right.
I understood it. And so, you know, I was already sort of equipped with a certain with certain skills about these tumultuous times that would exist in a household and in my relationship.
And I just remind you, Jen, that I witnessed Grandma in the kitchen being unbelievably rude, hostile, and unkind to multiple wives
Oh yeah.
before you, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and she didn't like anybody, and she was not putting up with it. And
She
then,
liked Pam Grier.
yes, she liked Pam Grier. And that's, and by the way, so do I. I like Pam Grier.
Yeah, I like Pam Grier.
She's
too.
lovely.
Yeah. So setting that aside, Richard would come in the kitchen after some poor hapless wife had been savaged by Grandma,
Yeah.
and he'd say, "So what did you?" And he'd start to stick up for her, and Grandma would just level him, and he wouldn't be Richard Pryor at 40 anymore. He would be Richard Pryor at 8.
8 years old. That's
You know?
exactly right. That's again that there was you know, to demonstrate the tear, the being torn between the child in the brothel as a kid,
Yes.
growing up, and then this adult who's making it in the world and doing wonderful things.
Yeah.
And there she was to pull him back in and say, "Do you remember who you are?" Now that's not unusual, by the way. I think in the African American community, you are kind of required, if you make it, to bring everybody else along.
Yes,
right?
I understand that.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Right.
this is and I get that, but this relationship was particularly hard on Richard, and you know, she did things to me that were, she sent a woman, well, God, yeah, she sent.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh Lord. Well, one night, Richard and I had been up most of the night, and we wanted to go to sleep, and she kept calling us, and I had hired a housekeeper cook from John Schlesinger, who was a friend of mine.
Right.
And her name was Barbara, and African-American woman. And she kept calling us on the phone, and Richard said, "Please leave us alone. We're trying to go to sleep." And the phone rang again, and he said, "Jennifer, tell them." Well, I told them again, and it was the grandmother. And she said, "Tell Richard there's a man out here with a stick." And I said, "What does she mean? What's going on?" Well, a few moments later, the bedroom door flew open, and Barbara's there with a 2x4, and it's over my legs.
Wow.
This is how they meted out punishment in the whorehouse.
Wow.
And Barbara climbed on top of me, straddled both my arms, knees up, and she was a big woman, both, and had her hands around my neck. And Richard got off the bed and watched this and finally decided that, oh my gosh, I think Jennifer needs help.
God. Oh,
I
Jen.
was choking. I was being strangled. And he got her off. And of course, that afternoon, I had some choice words for the grandmother because she had set all this in motion.
Right.
And I was basically told to leave the house until I apologized to the grandmother.
Yeah. I don't doubt that. I really don't doubt that.
Yeah.
Just...
and I had to apologize because wild horses weren't going to drag me away. She was not going to banish me from Richard. She wasn't going to do that. So she and I believe, were locked in a true Shakespearean struggle for Richard and for the love, for him. It wasn't pretty. And then, of course, she died eventually.
Yes.
And that really devastated Richard.
I know it did. On the other hand, a lot of us breathed a sigh of relief when that happened, you know.
Yeah.
You had a very loving relationship with him, and as I said, he spoke frequently about how much in love he was with you, to me. Did the whorehouse spill over into your lives in a measurable way?
Oh, I think so. I definitely felt as if, he called me one night in particular. He was doing coke and he left the house and he called me from a horror house.
All right.
And ostensibly, and said, I'm telling so-and-so how much I love you. And you know how sometimes I just can't handle it. And this is the deepest relationship I've ever had. And I don't know what to do. And I said, well, baby, can you come home and talk to me about it? Because, no, there were definite, and also Thom, and I know you remember this too, that with enough booze and cocaine, he would acquire this bravado and put on that cloak of the sort of the badass, the black man, and become this different person. This different persona would therefore, invade him. Where it would. It's like, well, who are you? Who's this person?
Yeah.
Who's sitting in front of me? And he saw that. He's imitating something that he saw.
Yeah, no, it's all true. And lots of those characters, I think, of his actually emerged from the childhood. Can you come with us now to the fire? Let's go to the explosion and the few days around that.
Oh gosh, terrible.
What was your percent? How did this occur to you?
Okay, so the first time Richard ever did freebase, I remember walking into the house and smelling fire. This is really bizarre. And I followed the smell, and it was in the bedroom. He had lit his mattress on fire, accidentally, on purpose, I don't know. Ended up having to drag it into the bathtub and put this fire on. I don't know if Richard was secretly an arsonist or what, but how did this happen, Richard? Oh, I'm lighting the pipe, and his drug dealer, Bert, had just turned him on to this thing. Well, it was, needless to say, not a good time. This began a very bad period. And he had just finished shooting Family Dream. Right. In Washington. And he and I were having a difficult period. He was cheating on me. And it was not a good period. And so he began this pipe smoking this shit. And he became addicted. We took a trip to Hawaii at Christmas time, trying to get him off it. But he was pretty addicted. I moved out on February of that year February 1980, because the pipe had basically moved in. Right. And I wasn't going to hang with that. I did it with him for a few times, and it was, to me, horrible. Yeah. It obliterated the mind, the body. It was And Richard was, as I said, it had moved into the house. And there was no, and he was shooting at this time now, stir crazy.
Right.
And he went out to Tucson to make it. And I joined him up there for a few days, and some really scary times up there. He was getting cocaine and cooking it with Rashawn as his helper.
Right.
You know, there were people, it was Sidney Poitier and Hannah Weinstein and Jean, and they all had places down in town, in Tucson, in the village.
Right.
And Richard wanted this rent-a-house in the mountains, which was already kind of creepy, right? And there were people who were watching him, and I believe they were drug dealers. I could, you know, sometimes at night I would say, Richard, somebody's outside. He would say, don't worry about it. And he would, you know, cock this shotgun and just get ready if we need. I mean, it was scary. Richard was really gonzo on this drug. And so eventually I had, as I said, moved out. And back in Los Angeles, he was really having a spotty time shooting this. And he walked off the set. Hannah called me and said, can you get him to come back, Jennifer? We're doing some reshoots. And
Right.
I went out to the house, and he said, and this is now on June 9th, 1980, the fire, he said to me, you know, Jennifer, you better leave or it's going to happen to you too. And he had been, you know, there was some, as I said, bad times between us, but he frightened me. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, if you don't leave, it's going to happen to you too. And Richard never made an idle threat, never made an idle threat. Mm-hmm. So I was able to get out of that room, but kind of by the skin of my teeth. And I went to the kitchen. This is after a night, by the way. I need to backtrack. I'd spent the night with him and woke up in the morning that he was going through a mound of coke like this.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's when, you know, it was out of control. By the time I got to the kitchen, I said to Aunt Dee and a couple of hangers-on from Peoria who he had brought out.
Yes. Right.
There's going to be trouble. Something's going to happen. He's making threats. And they basically said, get out of here, you silly white girl. Mm-hmm. So I got in my car. I drove back to, at that time, I had an apartment in Beverly Hills. And I called Jim Brown. And I said, Jim, Richard is in trouble. Do something. And I had talked to Jim previously about trying to get Richard into rehab. Mm-hmm. To no avail. Richard wasn't listening to anybody. Richard was, you know, allowed to self-destruct, basically.
Right.
And so I hung up with Jim, and I called the house. And Auntie answered, and the next thing I know, she drops the phone, and I hear screams.
Right.
This is about 30 minutes after I left. In
Right.
those days, you could get to Northridge, to Beverly Hills in lickety-split. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
But he had lit himself on fire, and he poured 180 proof rum over himself and torched himself.
Right.
I hightailed it out to the hospital. I had heard they got him to Presbyterian Valley Press.
Right.
And I went in and I told the doctors, I said, look, he's full of booze and full of drugs. Be careful you don't overdose him, whatever they were going to give him for pain.
Right.
And they transferred him to Sherman Oaks. The family was there screaming at me, you know, don't talk to the police, Jennifer, don't talk to doctors. What are you saying? You know, at all costs, they were trying to protect still. And you know the rest of this, you know, you're part of the story now. But, and then we went to, he was taken to Sherman Oaks.
Right, to the burn center, Dr. Grossman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it was a suicide attempt. I mean, pure and simple. He couldn't get it. He didn't know how to stop.
Right.
He did not know how to stop the drug. So
Right.
self-immolation seemed to be an answer.
And I don't want to dwell on this particularly because it's been covered to death.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get your personal take. And, you know, it was a horrible time for you, I know, and for a lot of us who cared about Richard, it was a very difficult time. And the recovery took very long time. You know, it was not a quick recovery from this, and it probably wasn't complete, at least from my point of view.
I agree.
When did you start arm wrestling multiple sclerosis? How did that When did that happen?
So I was now living. So after the fire, that's 1980. Richard and I got back together and remarried in 1981.
Right, I remember.
And so honeymoon gone south, a subsequent divorce. That long story. I moved back to New York, and as I said, we kept in touch through that decade. And in 1989, he came to New York to shoot See No Evil,
right,
and stayed at the Plaza Athénée and asked me for some help. He said, you can run lines with me. You can kind of, keep me on the straight and narrow here. And I said, okay, whatever the straight and narrow meant. It could have different meanings at different times. And one day, sure enough, he comes out of the bathroom of his suite, and I see blood trickling down his arm. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, it's bunk, Jennifer. Don't worry about it. I'm shooting up with bunk, whatever bunk is.
Yeah.
He was, and I said, why are you walking like an old man? This is 1989.
Right.
And he said, Jennifer, I was diagnosed with MS. That's why I'm walking this way. Because he was kind of silted and stiff.
Right.
And the film wrapped, and he was, seeing another girl he met on Madison. I told him take a walk up Madison Avenue. It's a beautiful day. You're so clingy. Take a walk. And he, of course, showed me, and he met a girl, and the rest is history. Small amount of history there, but and so I stayed in New York. He went back to Los Angeles. In the spring of '94, he was in New York at a tribute at the Apollo, and he was at the Helmsley Palace, and my apartment was a couple blocks down, 50th and First, and I went and visited him, and there were water glasses like that full of vodka and pills everywhere, and he was killing himself again. And this is spring of '94. I said, what are you doing? And there was Deborah asking me to go get the white woman price for the diamond ring at the jeweler in the lobby. And all this chaos was around him again. All the hangers on, all the ex-wives and girlfriends, oh God. I said, Richard, what's going on? He said, I'm in trouble. My life's going down my business, my life, everything's going down the tubes again. And I need help. So I said, well, I don't know, man. This is a heavy lift. So I took a couple of trips back to California to see what was going on.
Right.
And to kind of assess the situation.
Right.
And it wasn't pretty, Tom.
No, I bet.
The locust had descended.
Yes.
And it, I talked to my father, who was still alive at the time, who's a smart lawyer. And he said, look, if you go back there, you have to protect yourself.
Right.
You just, you can't move in with him. You have to rent a house. You just have to be smart. And so I drove cross country with my 2 dogs and a friend.
Right.
Summer of '94, I arrived. He was in a big rental on Havenhurst, not far from here, up from the Jackson compound. And just to keep that roof over his head, and the cook and the helpers and everybody, the nut monthly was ridiculous. He was hemorrhaging money.
Of course.
And so I knew the first thing I had to do was close the Bank of Pryor.
Right.
And try to really get his IP and his life in some sort of organized it and protect it. And I was threatened. I had my life threatened. I had to get restraining orders on one of the wives. It was really a big deal.
Yeah.
One of the maids threatened me. She said, I know people who will have you killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I bet you do. 911.
Yep.
Guess what just happened to me? And so there was quite a mess.
Yes.
I got him out of that ridiculous, hemorrhaging of the roof over his head, and that was ridiculous. We got him into a home. We started to stop the hemorrhaging of money, to rehabilitate him physically, and to rehabilitate his business.
Right.
And his legacy, his IP. I had to initiate lawsuits. People were selling shit that wasn't nailed down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
People smarter than me, Tom, and I won't name names, some of whom have passed on, some of whom are still quite vital in the business, were not protecting Richard.
Oh, I know that. I know that.
And you know,
Yeah.
and to whom he was paying big bucks.
Yes. Big bucks not to protect him. And remember the whole, the mugging that he received at the hands of David Franklin, who just stole everything in sight. And
You sued him.
Oh, I know you did. Hello. You may,
Well,
I don't.
Richard, there was a lawsuit. And you know what Richard wanted more than ever? More than that, $1 million, which David stole? He wanted a letter of apology.
Right. Right.
Which he got.
Yes, I'm sure he got it. Yeah. Did he get the Rolls Royce back? That's what I want to know.
No. The Ferrari, the Rolls, everything was, and that was a business manager. Again, I won't name names, but apparently there were a lot of lawsuits levied against that business manager before he passed. But it was, let me just say this, people who were supposed to be smarter than me were not watching the farm, were not protecting Richard.
Right.
And I had to learn quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what the heck? And I got to tell you, it's the thing I'm most proud of. My sense of loyalty for him, to protect him in all ways, so that he was living out his life with dignity and love and great care. We took wonderful care of him. The best doctors and rehabilitated him in all aspects the best we could. The MS was progressive, not remitting, but progressive.
Yes.
And he lived another 11 years.
I know he did. And Jennifer, you may remember I visited you guys a few times in the house up the hill.
Yeah.
Especially as Richard's ability to speak declined.
Yeah.
And I felt like once he couldn't talk, I in my own bizarre imagination, once he couldn't talk, I thought maybe people are not going to go see him because he can't talk. But I know Richard, and I know that the ability to talk did not shut off his ability to feel and understand and communicate.
That's right.
And you were genius when I would go there, because you would stand next to him and give him prompts by touching him on the shoulder or saying something out loud that he could hear to remind him, and he would then use facial expressions to communicate the entire story. It was kind of astonishing. You were really deeply loyal to him, Jennifer, and I can't tell you how much anybody who cared about Richard appreciated that.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that acknowledgement. I do. Those who understand, and you are one who really understands the profound need of someone to be there for him in those days.
Yes, he desperately needed it.
Yeah,
Bill,
he really needed it.
We're going to run out of time here in a little bit, Jennifer. But before we go, Bill, what are we leaving out that we should be talking about?
Well, I just think that you're more than anyone probably the custodian, if you will, of his image, his legacy, and I'm sure that people ask you this all the time, and it's hard to answer. But do you have a sense of what his legacy is?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, his legacy, it's growing.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I, of course, am in the position of enhancing it, right? Not only protecting it, but enhancing it, which is, I'm very proud to say that it's a mission I've taken on with great zeal and passion, and mission, if you will. But he has really cut through so much of the noise as to be on that pedestal as king of comedy, and from Whoopi, of course, as a great comedian herself, a great actress, how she feels about him and his legacy and what he has, how he now stands in the pantheon of greatness. I mean, he just does. He stands there pretty much alone. Yeah. I mean, there are satellites around. We've got wonderful comedians around him. Netflix is doing a Hall of Fame coming up May 1st, the Comedy Festival Hall of Fame. and it's Richard, George Carlin, Richard, Robin,
Right.
and Joan Rivers.
Right.
And, you know, and that's great company. But, you know, I have to say, Richard is the centerpiece there.
Sure.
I mean, I know he is.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying it, but, you know, I believe he is the centerpiece. But it's a wonderful legacy. And I think as time goes on, the emphasis on the drugs and some of the violence and that kind of falls by the wayside. Not that we're trying to whitewash it, of course. Not that we're trying to deny that it existed. Of course it existed, but that it wasn't who Richard was. I mean, Richard, you know, what's left is the genius of his work.
Right.
Yeah.
And the culture he changed. He changed culture.
He did.
He did.
Huge impact.
Yeah.
Huge
And
impact. Yeah.
and I'm so proud of him, and he's still very much alive. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all true. Jennifer, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your opening up in this wonderful way, and you're giving us your time today. And we are delighted and honored to be able to do a two-piece podcast about Richard and about you and about this whole
Fantastic.
context.
And the ashes, we have to go back to Hana.
Yes, that's right. You did distribute part of the ashes, I believe, in the sea at his house in Hana. And that's a beautiful spot and a sacred spot for Richard and a safe spot for Richard.
Yes.
So when you do that, let us know, please.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Thank you so much, Tom.
All right.
Thank you, Bill. Yes.
Thank you for being with us. This was great.
I've enjoyed this.